Hello from a baking hot Madrid. I hope you're all doing amazingly well. From whichever part of the world you are watching. Today, I would like to talk about the wonder deficit in both the hospitality and wellness industries. And this topic has kind of popped up while I've been writing the first chapter of my second book. And here's what came to mind. I read that families save for years to go to Disneyland. Years, and sometimes even decades. So the question is, what is it that drives families to spend insane amounts of money, tens of thousands of dollars in some instances? What drives them to go into debt? What drives them to save for nearly a decade? What drives children to dream about going to Disneyland? What drives this connection before people even arrive to Disneyland? What creates that strong, deep desire where people become completely irrational and want to live this particular experience? And here is what I think Disney has done really, really well. Disney understands something that I think we in hospitality and even wellness and hospitality have completely forgotten. And that is, people don't save for luxury. They actually save for wonder. This deep desire, this feeling of something extraordinary might happen, something they don't even expect. So here is what Walt Disney did incredibly well. Most people I was reading think that he builds theme parks, but he really didn't. What he did was that he built a world, an entire world, a destination. Walt Disney didn't believe in that traditional amusement park. Actually, he hated them. And he wanted to create places that were completely different, worlds in of themselves. Worlds where both adults and children could experience wonder together. And everything he did served that purpose. So every sound, every interaction, everything. Disney wasn't creating attraction. Disney was designing emotions. And here is where I see hospitality and wellness go wrong. And that is the wonder deficit. So a hotel can be beautiful, luxurious, incredibly high rated, super brand loyalty, incredibly impeccably and professionally run, and still be something that guests, just forget when they leave. And here's why. Luxury, in the traditional sense that we use it in hospitality, creates admiration. People love the design. People love the places. People love the culture. But wonder is what creates the emotional connection. And most hotels, particularly the luxury brands, have become masters of luxury. But very few intentionally design wonder. And this is where I think Disney has something important to teach both the hospitality and wellness industries. And I think that if we look at this wonder deficit, why exactly is it happen? Why does it happen? I think it happens because there is an anticipation gap, so to speak. So most hotels and wellness brands think that the actual experience begins at arrival at check-in. And if we look what Disney does, Disney actually understands that the experience begins when the dream begins, months, years before arrival. So they're looking at the planning stage, they're looking at imagining, at the conversations, having at the excitement, the anticipation, the emotional investment. And by the time a family arrives at Disney, they're already emotionally attached. The experience hasn't created the attachment, it's the anticipation that has created that attachment, that deep desire to literally do unreasonable things to live that experience. So, when we look at the hotel business, hotels focus on creating a better stay. And Disney focuses on building that anticipation and creating a stronger emotional connection through that anticipation. So, what the better stay in a hotel does is that it builds satisfaction. But the anticipation that Disney focuses on, that strong emotional connection, is what builds attachment. And it is this attachment that creates the loyalty, the advocacy, the memories, the stories, the return visits. So if we had to map out the entire kind of journey of a client, they start with dreaming of the possibility. Then they start planning all the logistics. Then they start with the anticipation. They finally arrive, they stay, or they have the experience. Then they have the memory of the experience. Then they create stories in their own mind of the memories they have. And then they go back, they return. So the question for hotels is, what part of this journey are you actively designing? And I see most hotels focus on arrival, a few detailed messages pre-arrival if they're the ones who are actually controlling the arrival experience and it's not through OTAs or tour operators. They don't really always control that experience. So it's always the arrival, the stay, and the departure. And all the money is spent on making arrival smooth and making departure smooth. Literally hundreds and thousands of dollars are paid to make those experiences seamless. But they all center on arrival, stay, and departure. Nothing or hardly anything focuses on building that anticipation, on creating that wonder, on actually helping clients relive the memory of their experience, helping clients tell their own story of the memory they have of the experience, and then returning for more. It is that wonder, that deep desire that builds that attachment. And I was working with a client and we're working on the customer journey. So it's, the second stage of my essence model, and we're working on the winning plan, mapping out the entire customer journey long before they even get to the hotels, to the actual hotel, to the wellness facilities, and long after they leave the wellness facilities and long after they've checked out the hotel. And they told me that some people spend up to a year in advance planning their trip to this particular part of Spain. So they're thinking and even looking for hotels a year out. And they're there for probably a week, 7 days maximum, and they're gone. A year versus 7 days. Now, guess how many touch points that team wrote for that year in advance compared to those only 7 days of the stay. We had around nearly 45 touch points in those 7 days and barely 5 for pre-arrival 1 whole year before. And absolutely nothing after departure. Nothing trying to entice people to come back again. And I see this time and again. I also read that Walt Disney didn't say that he was making more money. I'll go back to that. I'm losing my train of thought. So I read in a quote here, so I had it written down in my notes, and I'm trying to go off my notes. So he said that we aren't making more movies to make more money. He flipped that and said, we're making more money so we can make more experiences. Here is what hoteliers always tell me. Sonal, ultimately, we're in the business of filling in our room nights. So we're creating all these experiences so that we can fill room nights and ultimately make more money. Just imagine if we just shifted that perspective and said, we're filling in our room nights so that we can create more memorable experiences, which will ultimately make us more money. Subtle difference. So we're not creating more experiences so that we can fill room nights. We're actually filling rooms so that we can create even more memorable experiences. And ultimately, both paths lead to Rome, making more money in the business world. And I found that particularly interesting because always the number one thing hoteliers tend to ask me, and even wellness leaders, and I understand it because the intention is you want your guests to have a better experience and you also want your teams to have a better experience. But asking the question, how can we improve guest experience? I think therein lies the problem. That is actually the wrong question. The question should actually be, how do we become part of the guest's imagination before they even arrive. Because now you're not competing on the room size, how swanky your spa is, how beautiful your amenities are, and all the little kind of storytelling initiatives that we become so creative at. It no longer becomes about that. It becomes about what is our guest anticipating before they arrive? What moments create wonder when they're with me, even before me? And what stories do guests leave with? Hospitality has become incredibly amazing at creating outstanding properties. Beautiful properties, beautiful designs, just idyllic locations, impeccable service. They've become amazing at creating luxury. And that amazing service means that guests leave satisfied. But the stay only creates that satisfaction. And guests expect that if they're spending that amount of money. Luxury is not something people save for. But if we were to focus on wonder, this deep, deep emotional connection, the 1 year before people actually come to your property, on really building that anticipation, that feeling of wonder, that anticipation of something someone has not even lived before, something that is a figment of their imagination. That is what creates attachment. And I think that is the strongest and the most powerful way to create loyalty that endures over time. And if we actually built our entire experience around building that anticipation, really working on that wonder during the stay, and not to mention what that would do post stay, so people come back again and again. And even if they don't, they're telling their stories in such a powerful way that everyone wants to be part of that experience. Everyone will do insane things to actually live that experience. So when we just look at luxury, we do become easily forgettable. But when we actually tap into this desire of wonder, of amazement, of something you didn't even expect, that is when you have a very powerful connection. And if everyone's centered around focusing on that, our experiences, how we deliver, how we do our business would be very different. Because we're not creating experiences to fill room nights. We're filling in our rooms so that we can create truly mind-blowing experiences. And I think sometimes just shifting that focus will make us go a lot further and create truly memorable experiences for our guests. And on that thought-provoking note, I wish you all a beautiful day ahead. Take care now.